All right, so let's get into transit route service evaluation. And within this, we are going to talk about transit service. So what is a TBEST route? How to use TBEST to evaluate transit service. We'll talk about TDP applications and situational appraisal, existing service summaries and route summaries. We'll look at evaluating the TBEST network service using service reports, service summaries, schedules, both estimated ridership and observed ridership with load ratios. And then we'll showcase some examples where TBEST evaluation tools support TDP requirements and applications. And then we'll also have an exercise at the end. So switch this to presentation mode. All right, so let's talk about what is a TBEST route. What does that mean to you? And so I'm going to start from the beginning. Basically, a route is set up with, obviously, it's a directional structure that is a linear route, and it can operate in two directions or one direction. It's composed of either a single pattern in both directions or multiple patterns in both directions. Each of those patterns have route segments that make up the actual alignment, and each alignment has stops that are associated with it. So TBEST has all of this as a network, meaning that they all know their relationship to each other. So it's not just a shapefile that has stops in it or has lines in it that don't mean much, right? This has all of the attributes and is managed fully within TBEST, so that even when you're creating routes, it knows the relationships between the stops, the patterns, the segments, and how everything works together inside of the route. Typically for a TBEST situation where you're bringing in routes into TBEST, it's say from a GTFS, it would be for a typical service for a weekday, Saturday, or Sunday. So it essentially represents a day, a typical day of service. So it's not all of your service together in one, where maybe in a GTFS you have lots of service periods and your service changes with each period. We're just going to ask you to bring in basically one service day, and then that's what's represented in TBEST. So in addition to kind of the basic of the geography and the route patterns and segments and stops, you also have additional attributes for operational characteristics such as fare and service levels. You can define a route type in terms of radio, crosstown, circulator, express, and others. You have a technology type, bus, light rail, heavy rail, people mover, and others, and cost levels and seat capacity that could be set at the route level. Okay. So here is a kind of a route structure in TBEST, a hierarchy diagram of what makes up a route and at different levels of structure. So at the highest level, you have just the route itself. And on the left, you see that there are TBEST tools that you can interact with that would get you to different levels of either editing or reporting or querying for individual structure levels, right? So at the route level, you have a market assessment, service summaries, queries. You can look at schedules. And then if you go down to the next level, you have service patterns. So those are your individual patterns that make up the route. And then you also, on the other side, you have operational data. So the route itself is made up of, has cost attributes, fare attributes, route type, and seat capacity we talked about. And on the left, you have service patterns, which are made up of vehicle trips and alignments. So basically, your alignments are made up of segments and stops. And your stops contain additional attributes for SE data, land use data, special generators, stop amenities, and even the APC data is housed here. And then on the trip side, you have a service span and in-vehicle travel times and speeds by time of day. So this is just as a reference and kind of a hierarchy that you can come to after the training and kind of see how things are managed and a hierarchy and structure within TBEST for a route. Okay, so what we want to do is kind of tie this in a little bit with our, when you're evaluating transit service and looking at your existing network and how it can be tied into the TDP. So we mentioned this table up front. This is just a kind of a refresher on the TDP handbook section and what you might want to evaluate for your existing conditions. So essentially this particular module is about existing conditions. And so that's what the handbook is. The references here are for existing conditions. Okay, so we mentioned the routes panel. So here is a screen capture of the routes panel. You can see that it has all the routes listed, and it has their description, their type, the route type, the technology type, a minimum layover as a percentage, the cost per mile or per hour you would set depending on what you set here, the capacity of the bus that serves this particular route, and then on down you have weekdays, Saturday and Sunday service days annually, so that when you're annualizing your reporting, it's counting the actual number of service days you would have for a particular route service. So why that's important is that you may have a route that only operates on Friday. So that if you're annualizing that particular route, you wouldn't annualize it by the total weekdays. You would then take the Friday count as opposed to all of the weekdays. So this is a way for you to set up your annualization if it diverges from the typical service to make sure you're incorporating that in your in your reporting. So you have lots of tools for managing routes as well. You can create new ones. You can add patterns. There's reporting characteristics here. You can modify the service. Lots of tools that will go over here and interact with this directly as well. So any route that you have in your list is also displayed in the map by default. And you can see that the color coding here in the map is relative to the color code defined for each route itself. So over on the left-hand side, you see that this is kind of a mode image or icon. This will change if you go to bus versus rail versus ferry, route type, etc. But it also has the color of the route defined as well. So once you select a route here, it will then select in the map, and the color in the map will be relative to the color of the route that's defined. So inside of this route, or inside of the map, I'm sorry, you have the ability to edit the digitized segments, stops, and trace segments, which we'll get into. You can select routes using the route panel list or route identify tool via single click, and or drag a box. You can select segments and stops and routes just like you do in ArcGIS. You have the base map quick link. You have the ability to open this map in ArcGIS, and you can also clear all of your selections, etc., using this button, this erase button. So, so this is what the map window looks like, and we'll get into this in just a moment. You also have a segments panel, and so where you can perform geography edits, you can make selections of particular segments that you want to maybe delete. You can add segments, you can edit them, you can merge and split segments. You can create segments at time points, and you can delete segments. And you can also edit the in-vehicle time or the speed by time of day. So down here in the list, so as we look at this, the list in segments corresponds to the map. So right here we have our Route 1, and we have a westbound pattern, this 1-0, that we have activated, which means that it's available for editing. So when you do that, it automatically promotes to the top of the segments panel each individual segment on this particular alignment and tells you all the travel times and speeds. So to get to speeds, you would click this view, and you could switch to speed as opposed to in-vehicle time and edit either one of them. So this allows you to basically get to the segments and then start to edit this particular route, add new segments, realign it, etc., inside of the routes or inside of the map panel. Okay, another tool that we want to highlight here, and we're going to highlight lots of tools, but this is kind of setting us up for our initial validation. So these are some of the things that you might want to do Whenever you're doing your initial validation, if you're a Florida agency, you're downloading your transit system, these are the updates you might want to consider before you actually validate. So that's why we're showing you some of these initial tools that will help you do that. And we'll go over this in the exercises as well, but this is explaining them before we get to them. So you can also have your stops panel was also listed, where you can add and delete stops. You can move stops. You can edit their name, description, and their time point variables. You can also add special generators, amenities, and even add park and ride spaces. And generally, the editing part, you can do it directly in this grid, or you can use this calculator button, which would allow you to, whatever you have selected, so if you have one or more stops selected, you can calculate their amenities or generators and add multiples at a time, etc., and for multiple selections. So this calculator interface becomes very handy for populating these special generators and amenities for multiple selections and interactively selecting stops and calculating these values. And we'll go over this in the exercise. Okay, so one of the primary elements that you have in a TBEST service is a TBEST service report. So I want to get to this, but before I do that, I'm going to switch out of this particular, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a demonstration to get us into this scenario. So what we just looked at, I want to show you inside of TBEST, okay? So right now this can be a demonstration. We're actually going to go through this in our exercises as well, but more in a structured way. So this is more of a demonstration that I want to show you, so you can just basically kind of watch what I'm doing at this moment. So I have the June 2021 scenario, and I want to open it and kind of interact with it in the map and in the routes panel and the segments and stops panel. But to do that, I have to open it. So if I right click on it, the option to do that is this Open Scenario Network Editor. And I think that I double clicked on it. Yes, I did. I double clicked on it. So the other option is actually to double click on it, which I did as well. So that's the other way to open this. So by default, yours may have a different map. I was using another map when I was last in it. So I will switch to the light gray base. And so this map should be the same as the map that you're using. So I mentioned that inside of the routes panel, you have lots of different attributes for a route. And we mentioned that a lot of these already in the slide, the weekdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. We didn't see there was a fare in here as well, a base fare and a transfer fare and an interline. So if you have routes that interline, you can define those as well. I also mentioned that you can select routes in this list. And when you select them, they will be selected in the map as well. So any selection I make here can be highlighted in the map. In addition to that, you can make a selection using the map itself. So this tool is select routes on the map. And if I click that, I can come over to my map and just kind of drag a box around any location, and it will select the routes that intersect with that. So here I have different listings, and you can see my selection changing in my list of routes here. So it's a great way to interact and show, use your map to select routes that intersect a particular location. So you also have the routes panel down here. I'm sorry, the segments panel and the stops panel. So our demonstration was to activate a route. So in the a route pattern for editing. So if I double click on the 10 westbound pattern for Route 1, it will take me into that edit mode that I talked about, where it promotes the segments that belong to this particular pattern, and the stops that belong to that pattern are now visible in the list of stops. So this is an active state where I can edit this route, I can add new geometry to it, etc. So if I select a segment, what that tells me is that this is the first segment on the route. So it starts right here and it ends at this time point. And then the next selection would be the following segment. Likewise, stops can be selected. So if you notice, I can select all of these stops. I could also do that using the map. Okay. So I wanted to just give you this basic kind of start and demonstration so you can get a little bit of context for this before we move on and to the next element here of route evaluation. I do see that there's a couple of questions.
Yeah, Rodney, I can read them out. Matthew asks, does the GTFS colors or the specified colors in GTFS, are they brought into TBEST automatically?
Yes.
Yes, based off of the 6-digit color in the route color code in GTFS. And then Susan asks, what are the different definitions of AM peak, off peak, PM peak, and night? I think we're about to get to that, so
yes,
maybe we can hold on to that question just for a second.
That's right. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the slides and we'll talk about the TBEST service report. So this is one of the core features of TBEST that make it really very handy, especially relative to the GTFS. So essentially, whenever you bring a GTFS into TBEST, you automatically are able to view this report without doing anything at all. You don't have to do a model run. You don't have to do anything other than open the scenario and make some route selections, and it will produce this report for you. So that's one of the great things about it, and that the elements of this report can go directly into a TDP. So the example that we have is the Lynx 2019 TDP update service plan, where they have variables for headway and vehicle hours and miles and annual service days, and then annualized numbers for hours, miles, and cost. So all of that is calculated in this particular report and could be then exported to Excel to build a table very similar to what you have here, or you could even use it as is if you want to. You can notice that there is a service period here that can be changed, and it can be changed to weekday, or you can get to the individual peak periods, and then get also to Saturday and Sunday service, and then annualize your service as well. At the bottom, you will notice that you have a tabulation as well. So whatever selection you make, it will give you either the sum or the average of that particular variable, and then you have that available to you. So Brian is saying, can you drag the borders of the map window to make it larger?
Oh no, he was saying that his map it's very small, so and he can't seem to change the borders. So Rodney, in your next when you go back to TBEST, maybe you could demonstrate how to resize each window.
Okay.
And I'll help Brian.
Okay, great. Okay. So kind of the next level of service evaluation, and this gets into a little bit of the socioeconomic characteristics as well, is that we have a route service summary in TBEST. And this is really meant to be a route evaluation tool where you can get to a lot of the characteristics of your route in one interface and include a map of it as well. And you can then go from route to route to produce service evaluations and summaries and actually export those to Excel, into maps, et cetera, and data, so that you can use them in your TDP or other evaluations, or even an operational analysis in terms of doing route profiles. So lots of variables here to look at, and you can see that it's categorized by a route service summary where you have round trip length, the number of stops that are served, an average stop spacing, the service hours, the route operation settings. So those are more inputs that you would provide rather than something that TBEST would spit back out to you, but you can modify those here. If you do make changes to these, it will impact your service summary. You also have the demographics around the route, and you have the route service detail by TBEST time period. And yes, Susan, we'll get to the time period definition shortly. You also have the map here that you can interact with as well. And there's this toolbar at the bottom that we'll get to. So just in terms of the map itself, you can switch the stop description, or you can change the service day. So if you have a different service on Saturday and Sunday, meaning relative to the actual stops and geography of the route, then it will appear here in the window so that you can see if there are any differences in your route alignment by weekday, Saturday, and Sunday. You also can go to the map button where you can get direct access to market analysis for this particular route. And you can go to a copy button to copy to clipboard, and you can export this data into ArcGIS. So on the toolbar at the bottom, and hopefully y'all can see this, but we have this red highlighted at the bottom. The maps button we looked at, where you can get to demographics and maps for different variables. You can get to the schedule. You can get to ridership data. You can get to settings for the route, and you can get to the service editor. And so the service editor is kind of cool because you can go and make service edits. And then when you come back, all of this will be updated to reflect those service edits. So you go out, make an edit, you come back to your service summary, and it will tell you how all of this has changed relative to your service edits. So, and we'll go over the trip editor and how that works as well, and how that rolls back up into this summary. But the idea here is that you have one place to kind of evaluate your full service on a route by time of day, the number of vehicles, the costing, et cetera. And it's very consumable and readable. So when you go to the market, the map button, that's when you get to automatically be transitioned into the market analysis interface, where you can get to lots of different maps that would be reflective of individual variables that you want to show the distribution of along the route. And this is part of your TDP Handbook Transit Demand Assessment for traditional/discretionary markets. You can also get to the schedule. So automatically, whenever you bring a GTFS in, or if you edit a route in TBEST, it will generate a schedule for you, which contains detailed vehicle trip arrival times at time points. And generally, this would be in a directional by day. So in this case, it's northbound on Route 15, northbound weekday. That's the schedule we're showing in this particular grid. Note that time points must be defined by the user, otherwise the schedule will begin and end at the endpoints of the route. So if your GTFS has time points defined, then those will show up here in the service. If you're defining a route from scratch, then if you can add time points to the route, but if you don't, it will just be the begin and end point of the route. Okay, also relative to the service summary, you can get to the estimated ridership report. So this is, if you've run the TBEST estimation model, you can get to what it estimates for this. So how this relates to TBEST is it's done by time period. You get the total boardings, the direct boardings, the transfer boardings, and the boardings per trip, mile, and hour, and then you annualize boardings at the end. So this is a good way to kind of see all of the ridership projections that TBEST would make for each one of its time periods, and then also the annualized number at the bottom. So if you're, and you can switch your route and kind of go from route to route. So this is a great way to interrogate the ridership that TBEST predicts, and does it make sense with, you know, what you've defined for your route. And also, as it relates to the TDP, it can be pushed over into a productivity report. And in this case, it's the JTA 2019 TDP, where they're looking at different route types in terms of mainline or connector or frequent routes, and then summarizing the annual ridership, the daily riders, and then your performance measures and load measures. So, so something for you to consider, that this is available for for the estimated ridership. Now, so this is where we want to transition to talk a little bit about the observed ridership. So just like we had with the on the service summary, we had on the toolbar, you can get to this observed ridership detail. And so what this is if you've configured your TBEST with the stop level APC, which means that whenever you brought in your GTFS, you created an additional file called stopridership.txt, and that is a TBEST specific file. and we'll talk about how that's configured. And then you've used that to import your ridership data along with the corresponding GTFS into TBEST. Then you will have this report available to you that allows you to summarize total boardings, total alightings, your actual observed by time of day for this particular route, annualize the boardings, and then also create passenger miles, average passenger trip length, a max load ratio, and an average load ratio for that particular route by time of day. It responds to the vehicle seat capacity. So whatever the value is here by default, it will respond to this relative to the load ratios. You can change that. You can also click this view stop level load ratios button, and that will take you to a diagram where on the diagram you have your sequential stops in the horizontal direction. And then your load ratio would be calculated here in the vertical direction so that you can see as you progress along this particular route pattern. This is eastbound on the same route, Route 9 in the PM peak, and see the load ratio as you go along the route. So all this is calculated for you inside of TBEST. You don't input this. It comes in if you've configured your APC data for TBEST. This is what you can get out of it, right? So this is one of those tools that can get out of it. Now, as it relates to the TDP, this is an example of the JTA 2019 COA TDP service productivity. So in their reporting, they created a route map that has basically the ridership along the route is relative to this heat map. So while this wasn't used, TBEST, I don't know that they used TBEST to produce this. I don't know if they did or not. But the idea is that you could use TBEST to produce this. If you have your APC data in, you can easily export this out and put it into ArcGIS to create this particular map. You can also use TBEST to produce something very similar to what they've done here, where they're evaluating their ridership for a particular route. Okay, so as this kind of gets put together, what you see is that it's forming a route profile. So the higher level of this is this route service summary has a lot of elements that you would put into a route profile. And the example here that we have is from HART. This is Route 1, Florida Avenue, where a lot of the statistics and data that went into this particular summary were formed from TBEST. So, so this is just a great example of a route profile where you have a description, a land use summary, a ridership and running time summary, and then the data that's served here is generated out of the TBEST system. Okay. So I don't know if any questions came up, Matt?
I was partly in a breakout room, but Susan asks, can I go and edit the route types that are assigned by default in the Gatorville transit system or any other transit system that is downloaded?
Yes. Yeah, we'll be doing that. Absolutely. Okay, so were you able to get his map, Brian's map?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, so we do have an exercise here. So a lot of what we just went through, we're going to go through an exercise and look at, and we'll walk through some of those steps with you. So I'm going to move my exercise steps over on my other screen. I'm going to come back to my TBEST. And so what I want to do is come back to where I want to be at the start. So a couple ways to do that. I can just close this scenario altogether, or I can go to my route options and clear my edited pattern. And that will take me back to where I'm no longer editing that route. And I actually want to clear everything, so I'm just going to do clear map. And so that will clear all of my selections, everything out, so that I'm starting from just, as if I just opened the scenario. Now you may be starting from a different location where you're just opening, you're into June 2021. I went ahead and closed the scenario so I can start from this point again, and I can right click on June 2021 and select the open scenario network editor. Okay, now that it's open, hopefully everyone is following along with the steps here, and I'm going to go to, I'm on exercise 2.2, TBEST routes interface, exercise step 1, evaluating transit service and performance using the route service summary. So the first step was to open the June 2021 scenario, which we just did. The second step is to access the route service summary for Route 1. So in the routes panel, double click on Route 1 or right click on the route and select service summary from the context menu. So I select Route 1, here is my Route 1, and I can right click on it and select service summary. Or if I double click on it, it will open the service summary as well. So either way, we'll do the same thing and open the service summary for Route 1. So in step 3 is in the route service summary, use the route drop-down list to evaluate additional route service and alignments. Return to Route 1 when complete. So the idea here is that you can move to other routes just by selecting them in the list. So if I want to see Route 10, I can select it and the map, everything will switch to Route 10, all the summaries will switch to Route 10. Likewise, I'll go to a commuter route. So here is my Route 25 that goes out to the airport from a commuter lot downtown. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to Route 1. Okay, so step 4 is use the route service summary table, maps, and schedule to answer the following questions for Route 1. What are the total annual revenue hours? Okay, so by default, what we see are dailies. And so to annualize those, all we have to do is make check this box, and it will annualize all of the numbers that are annualizable, meaning that only certain variables can be annualized. So, so the question is, how many total annual revenue hours? And the answer is 17,472.2. Right? And how many stops are served? So if we go up to our stops served here, it's 53 for Route 1. What is the percent low-income population that is served? Okay, so if we go over to our demographics, we have low income of 62.6%. Okay, in the route service summary toolbar, click on the Show Ridership Detail button and click TBEST Estimated Ridership. Okay, so on the toolbar, this is the toolbar in the lower right. We have Show Route Maps, we have Route Schedule, we have Show Route Ridership Details. So this is the one we want to click right now. And when you click it, it gives you a little menu option. TBEST Estimated Ridership is the option that we want to use here. And then the question is, what is the estimated weekday boardings per service hour? So you can see that just like we had in the slide, all of the route estimations are here for total boardings, direct boardings, and transfer boardings for this particular route. And the question is, what is the estimated weekday boardings per service hour? Okay, so that is our weekday boardings per service hour would be here. So here's our weekday total. 34.5 is the estimated boardings per service hour. All right. So E is use the observed ridership imported from GTFS to view the actual weekday boardings per service hour. Okay, so in order to do that, we will close this particular summary. We'll come back to our ridership detail, and we'll select the observed ridership from GTFS import. It will give you this scenario contains stop observed ridership imported from GTFS, but it has not been confirmed as accurate. So what that means is we did import the the ridership data in, but essentially until we validate the system, which means that we're saying that it's all valid, it's going to tell us this, right? So once we validate the system, we won't get this message, but it will show us the results. So the question is, what is the weekday boardings per service hour in actual, right? So the actual is 8.6. Okay. And we get into the load ratios and the vehicle miles. So here are the average load ratios. You can see they're very small. This is kind of post-pandemic. And also you notice here that there is a inconsistency in the APC data where the total boardings do not match the total alightings. And that is a function of the data that came in. So if you've ever worked with APC data, you know that it's not always exactly what accurate. So just to be, tell you what's happening here. One of the reasons that this is so low is because these two don't match, and these are needed for this load ratio calculation. So, so just be aware of that. That because the reason these are low is because these don't match. Okay, so but you can get into the view load ratio, stop level load ratios here. You can actually, switch this. This is AM peak. If I don't want to switch to PM peak, I can see the values for that. And when I do that, all of these will switch as well. And so you can visualize some of the values that are coming out of this. I realize this is pretty low, but that's essentially it. And remember that these are the sequential orders of the stops along this route. And this is the load ratio here. All right, so we'll close all of that. And we'll go to the route schedule. So the second from the left button is route schedule. And you can see that it gives you each one of the departure times from, in this case, the westbound direction on a service day is weekday, and the route pattern ID. So if there are multiple route patterns that serve this, each route pattern will then be listed here as well. So it's specific to a route pattern. And it gives you the time points at the top, and then the arrival times at each of the time points or by trip. Okay. And you can switch this. So if you want to switch to eastbound, you can. So here it starts at Butler Plaza and goes to downtown. If you want to switch to Saturday, then here are your Saturday trips. And if you switch to Sunday, here are your Sunday trips for the eastbound direction on Sunday. So it's really easy to evaluate these, export to Excel. When you do the export, it will just automatically say Route 1 eastbound Sunday and put it into a Excel format. And when you hit save, it will put this into a report form like this, which has the logo and then your actual arrival times at each time point. So it's a nice way to quickly output a schedule for a particular route pattern by day and direction. And you can also use, once you're in here, use your Excel tools. Like I like to put a border between all of these. So you quickly have a nice little schedule inside of Excel that you can utilize. All right, so I'll close that and I'll save it. Close this. Okay, so we had a couple of questions that came up. Matt, did you?
Yeah, some great questions. I think everyone is excited. Well, the rest of the training should be interesting. Alicia Bradshaw asked, does the annualized feature use a specific year? Can it account for a difference between like a normal year or a leap year?
That is completely definable by you, Alicia. So in here, you have the listing of weekdays, Saturday, and Sundays by route. So this is the number that will be calculated when you're annualizing. It's multiplying by this number for weekdays because there are generally 255, 55, and 55. But of course, the service changes. So sometimes you have weekday service on the weekend. For holidays, you have, might occur on a weekday, etc. So whenever you want to, you can come in here and change any of these values and make sure that they're in alignment with the actual number of service days for a particular year that you might be calculating for. And also for that route that only runs on Friday, you don't want to annualize that in terms of a day count for weekdays at 255. It would be more like 55. So that is the reason for these 3 columns, so that you can set those annualizations and counts the way that you want them. And the way that you do that, and we are going to do this actually pretty soon, is whatever routes you want to change, you can select them and you can go to this update route operation settings. And then whatever routes you have selected, you can use this tool to set the annual service days to whatever you want it to be and hit the update button. So it works off your selection, this settings form and tool. All right, so that's
that's one question. And then Zeb asks, is the speed MPH based off the stop times in the GTF file when imported? And how does TBEST calculate that?
Yes, it does. It's based on the average speeds by segment between time points. And it's from the GTFS. And so whenever you bring in your GTFS, that's what's reflected is the average stop time by speed / in-vehicle time by time period.
And Maurice has another great question. Can you show, can the low income demographic shown on the service summary be broken down to see areas on the map, and how would you do that?
Yeah, there are several ways to do that, and we'll definitely get into that, but I will show you directly from the service summary because it's kind of handy to do. So if we're at Route 1 here, we just open the service summary. We have our map button. And we can go into, if we want to see jobs or population, we get into specific population variables or household variables. So if we want to see 0 vehicle households that are relative to this, then we can select that and it will open the market analysis for this particular route that would quantify the number of households that are 0 vehicle. And so that total number is 387. And in terms of the total households, it's 9.4% of the total households that are in this particular walk shed from this route. And once you're here, you can see that we've automatically selected auto ownership 0 vehicle household, but you can then move to any different particular variable that you might want. So if we want to see primary language equal to Spanish, then we could switch over to that. And likewise, we get a summary here and the map distribution of primary language Spanish. So we're going to go over this in detail, the market analysis tools, but just as a quick kind of access point, you can get to it from here as well.
Great.
Okay. All right, so I am going to go to our step 2. So this is our next so Tara is, okay, she's asking if it looks, is it blurry for everyone to see my screen? So I just want, someone had commented if it's.
Yeah, when you're working in the TBEST screen, Rodney, it's very blurry.
It's blurry, okay. So maybe
I don't know, maybe you could zoom in on it.
Yeah, let me change my settings and maybe I can set this. So you all can tell me if this is any better.
I think that might be a little worse.
Oh no.
I think, Rodney, maybe if you exit TBEST, restore to your original resolution, and then make the scaling a little bit bigger, that might help.
This is Albert. This is better for me.
Oh.
This is Susan. It's also better for me at this resolution.
All right.
Okay. Super. All right.
If it's better for most people, then that's good.
Okay. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it because I really didn't know. So that's great. Okay, so we're going to move on to evaluating transit service using the route service report. And so this is exercise step 2. So there are only 2 slides for this particular exercise. We're on the second slide. So the first is to use the routes panel. map select tool to select all routes which access the University of Florida Ben Griffin Stadium. Notice that the map selection colors are relative to the defined route color. We've talked about that. The route list selection color is blue. Okay, so if you're familiar with Gainesville, you can zoom in on the stadium. So most of you are probably Florida Gator fans, so you've spent a lot of time in this parking lot. And actually, I'm just making that up. You're probably not, but so what we want to do is select all of the routes that access the stadium. So how do we do that? Well, we use our select routes on map tool, which is up on our routes toolbar. And we just drag a box around the stadium to make sure we're selecting all the routes that come close to it. Okay, so you can see that automatically it has selected the routes. It has also placed a label on what routes are traversing what areas. And it also selects those routes in our list. So the idea here is to be able to create a route service report that would tell us what these routes are in a report form and summarize them. So to do that, we would just right-click on our routes panel and select the first option, which is route service report. Okay. So by default, what you should see is this selection of 15 routes. So it tells you the total route count here. It tells you for a service period, weekday is the default, which routes are in service. So you can see 128 and 303 are not in service on the weekday. So we know that already. We can see that you have a service span in hours. And at the bottom, you have an average service span for all of the routes. You have the total route service trips, one-way trips. You have the average headway, and then the average headway for all of the selected routes, the round trip travel time, the speeds, and then the average speed, estimated vehicles, average layover, revenue, service hours, miles, trip length, stops served, average stop spacing, and operating costs for all the routes. Now, what I will mention to you is that this stops served, this will not add up to this number, because what this number is the unique count of stops. These are the stops that are served on each individual route, but some of them are shared by multiple routes, so we don't count them twice. So if they're shared across multiple routes, essentially we don't double count them in the total. So this is a unique value that would be all the unique stops that are served by all of these routes. Okay, so operating cost and then the service hours. Okay, so let's get to what are some questions here. What is the average weekday headway of all transit service to this location? That is this value, 24 minutes. How many weekday vehicle trips? So our vehicle trips are here, revenue service trips, 704. What is the average Saturday headway of all transit service to this location? So if we switch our service period to Saturday, then we see our Saturday route service summary, and we can see that Saturday trips are 101. And how many routes are in service? There are just 4 routes that are in service. What is the weekday operating cost? So again, we're going to switch back to weekday, and our operating cost is $17,259.5. What is the average weekday layover on these routes? And so the average percent layover is 19% of the travel times on the routes, right? So each individually has a layover percent of the total travel time, and then at the bottom you have the average. Okay, so it says use the route panel list to select all routes in the Gatorville network and evaluate the selection in the route service report. So what we want to do is close this report, and instead of doing a selection in the map, we're going to just select all of them. So in order to do that, you can click on it and you can do Control A, and that will select all of them, or you can do a select the first one and come to the bottom, hold your Shift key down and select all. So either way is fine. And again, we're going to right click on it and open the route service report. So this is the entire network. And what this is going to ask some questions, we're going to answer them. So what is the number of estimated weekday vehicles? So 94 estimated weekday vehicles were in the weekday period. What is the number of Saturday stops served and average stop spacing? So we're going to switch to Saturday. And we have our stops served are 819. And stop spacing is 1,156. Are Saturday values different than those on weekday and Sunday? Okay, so we have 819 for stop served. We go to weekday, it's 1,142. And yes, our spacing changed as well. If we go to Sunday, we are at 663 stops served, and 1,102 is our stop spacing on Sunday. What is the annual operating cost? Okay, so let's annualize all this information by changing the service period to annual. All right, so our annual operating cost for all routes is 25,161,750. What is the average Saturday headway of all transit service? And that would be to this location would actually be all service. So average Saturday headway is 43 minutes. How many Saturday vehicle trips? There are 698. How many routes are in service? That one's a little harder. It doesn't actually subtotal the ones that are in service. So that was a little harder to answer. You could get that through a query and get the exact ones that are in service, but for right now, you would have to go through and count each one in this particular report, which takes a little more effort to do. So I will avoid that question, but we will address it when we get to the query tool. So the fourth item in this exercise is to use the route service report export to Excel button to export the route service. Okay, so let's switch this to annual. And we will say the saved location will automatically default to see TBEST Transit System Gatorville report. So if we click the export to Excel button, it will automatically come to our See TBEST Transit Systems Gatorville reports folder. And we'll hit save. We'll accept the default name and hit save. And we'll open it. You'll probably get the same message, but it's fine. You can just say yes. And it will open. So all of our values are here, and it's also instructing us to put a border on it. So I just select all of the cells by dragging and add the border to them so that it just formats it a little bit better. And here we have our annual service report with lots of great information about our service that essentially is just kind of right out of the box. You can run this, and as soon as you download your TBEST Transit System, you have this for your June or your spring network and get these values from it. So, and this is where you can save this. Now you can put this into your TDP or your operational analysis, etc. You know, this is where getting it out of TBEST and into your hands to report out to your target audience. Okay, so let's close the Excel. And one thing that we'll notice, we'll go ahead and close this report as well. We'll notice that we now, under our reports menu or folder, under our Gatorville system, we now have two different reports. We had created this route service report, but we also exported the schedule. I don't know if you remember that. So those are open. You can open those from here as well. So this is the schedule we created earlier, and this is the report that we just created. So yes, you can open these back up just from inside of TBEST when they're saved under this folder. Okay, great. So kind of clear things out. What I'm going to do is I'll show you just a couple of additional tools that I think are kind of handy here. So let's make a couple of just a route selection in general on the list. and we can go to our route options. And we have a couple of options here which are nice. So we have a route selection render width. So this is a tool to allow you to change the width of the render of the selected routes. And so this, if you want to push this to like a 4, then it will kind of, make the symbology display relative to the width that you want to present your data, right? So if you zoom out a little bit, here is how this looks with a 4. And you can also always come back in and change this. If you want to make it a 6, you can do this as well. So you're not limited to necessarily what you see by default relative to this. If you really want to bold this, you can do that. You can also switch the selection. So if I want to switch the selection from the ones that are selected to those that aren't selected, I can use this tool. So then it switches the map to select those that weren't selected from my original selection. So that's kind of an ArcGIS type of tool that I'm sure you're familiar with if you've used ArcGIS. You can also set the label. So right now it's set to the route name, but I can switch it to the description. So instead of showing the actual route name, it's showing the description. You can see that this doesn't always work that well. This can be a little cluttered and confused. So use this at your discretion. If you're using, one route selection or a couple of route selections, this may work a little bit better than if you're selecting many. So cartographically, it's kind of difficult to get that all to work out in every context. So you need to use your kind of cartographic analyst and skills to make these selections and make the map that you want to make. All right, so let's go back to our original width, which is a 2. Okay, and we'll also go back to our label route name. So here we're at 121. So we're back to where we were. So to clear out just the route selection, I'm going to use this clear route selection button at the top on my panel. And now I'm back to where I want to be, kind of the default position. All right, great. Any questions relative to that? Okay.
Some questions, Rodney, but I think we're going to go over some of the questions about route formula, route cost a little bit later.
Okay.